Hello there, everyone. How are you today? We are so excited to be back with you with our Boardroom Banter with Community Champions. Woohoo! We're super excited to be here. My name's Patricia Hayes, and my colleague and fellow Boardroom Community Champion is Danielle Cade. Hey, Danielle.
Hey.
Oh my gosh. Well, before we get started here, why don't you let the people know what we've been doing?
Absolutely. So in this fascinating book, let's consider it. This will be chapter 3. So we've already done 2 chapters. One would be the composition of a healthy nonprofit board. So it's really just letting you know the things that you should be looking out for, as well as, fun examples, because what's more fun than real life? And then chapter 2 would be, again, the diving deeper into what questions exactly you should be asking in order to make sure that you're understanding the composition of that healthy board. So now in this one, we're going to get into those head in the sand moments, common challenges in nonprofit board service. It's not all fun and roses, you guys. I'm sorry.
It's not.
No. And I feel like the best way to announce that is expectation versus reality. Yes. A lot of times people join these nonprofit boards and they are ready to change the world, or at least their little corner of it. Yeah. Forgetting that there's already systems in places. There's still, board politics, there's staff, there's resources, limited funds, all of these things that need to be addressed. You're changing it a little bit at a time. So one of my clients used to say, "You don't want to boil the ocean." That's like that. It was so good. You don't want to boil the ocean. Like, we're here to make a small change a little bit at a time. And so that, to me, again, that's the hardest thing, that expectation versus reality. And what a lot of that comes down to is limited funding. When you enter board service, a lot of people realize that nonprofits aren't really moneymakers. It's a nonprofit. So there are certain steps that need to be taken in order to be proper stewards of those funds. That really is the mentality that you should be having. If people are volunteering, they're donating those funds, people are volunteering to use those funds, and then there are sponsors who are sponsoring them. So it's not your money and it's not a business. Mm-hmm. But nonprofit also isn't necessarily a business model. It's just your tax status. There's Correct. All these things that come into play. So the object is to spend the money that you have to advance whatever that organization is that you're volunteering on, but to remember that you only have so many resources in regards to funds, staff, volunteers, and things of that nature.
Yeah. I want to go back to that. I love that phrase that you mentioned about don't boil the ocean, because here's the reality. If you really are trying to boil the ocean, if you're having it, that means you're in major issues, which is one of the things why we said before, make sure you ask all the right questions before you accept. And look, even those of us who've been around doing this a very long time, I have had that moment. Danielle have had conversation, and I have had conversations about this offline, but where I, walking in as a very experienced board member, still ended up getting caught up in a situation that I did not realize it was as in trouble, as much as in trouble as it was, right? And so you are, quote, trying to boil the ocean because literally the organization is in crisis. And so that's why it's really important about that expectations, but whatever the reality of things are, is generally Daniel's right, you are not trying to make changes overnight on the whole thing. If you are, it means the organization is in complete disarray, and overhaul is required in order to right size it. So just keep that in mind, and that's one of those, definitely a challenge. And I've been on boards for public, or I've managed the board. This is when I helped manage the board before, where there was a major issue and board members literally were trying to hide from it. And it's like, you can't, like, this has to be done, because as a board member on any board, you have a fiduciary responsibility to the organization. And so as much as you may not like it and it's not fun, there are some times where you really are going to have to, like, suck it up, buttercup, and go do the thing and make things better. So I just had to drop that in there, because I've seen people get in and they're like, what in the world? And it's like, yeah, it's not pretty.
No, that's it's very true. And, a lot of it, again, you discussed that it had to do with that fiduciary responsibility. And sometimes can be really difficult, because with a nonprofit, since it's not necessarily based on sales, for example, all you need is one sponsorship, and that could completely turn the tides of that nonprofit's financial status. So it's really easy to, I find, for sometimes board members to, like, live on this dream of, like, okay, we're just looking for that one $10,000 sponsor. And right. It's a great idea, but it isn't necessarily always going to happen. Or you need to have that capacity that we discussed before, that a lot of volunteers don't really understand, or don't have a thorough understanding of how much they can actually give. So if you are in that area where you need some kind of sponsorship like that, you need to have a sponsorship director who's really on it and who's really able to commit to that.
Yeah. I mean, funding, like you were saying, that's the thing. It was like, well, why don't we just do? And you're like, yeah, because it's not free. Like, it's going to cost somebody something, whether you pay cash dollars for it or not. It's going to cost somebody something, whether it's time, other types of resources, money. Yeah. And I've seen it happen multiple times where, and there's one, I won't get too specific on the details, but where this is that one more recently.
Spilling secrets, guys.
Oh my God. But where literally it was a working board for many years, decades even. And it's one of those challenges where literally the board is taking on staff roles, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's, because sometimes it's happened for very small nonprofits. However, as people move on, as people age out, I mean, just literally, you end up realizing you now put the organization at a disadvantage, because key resources are walking away because they were volunteering their time with technical expertise. And now you have to go pay for that expertise. And no one ever thought about that. No one planned for that. And it puts the organization at risk, especially if that expertise was something that was very key to the core mission and function of the organization. And I'm not talking about what I'm, theory. I'm talking about a very specific situation that happened recently in a board that I was on. So it's a real thing. It really does happen.
I mean, it's a really good example, because there's a lot of ways you can volunteer your resources or your time. So certain things that nonprofit boards need, like bookkeeping. Hey, if you work for a bookkeeping firm, if you're a bookkeeper yourself, that is a way that you can volunteer your knowledge, and it would save the organization money. But the issue is, as Patricia said, you need kind of an offboarding plan for that, because that's not going to last forever, and it really shouldn't last forever. Yeah. Things like an event planner, things like what I do, the executive, there are things that you need to take into consideration. I think sometimes people forget even little things like, let's say, a lot of the smaller volunteer based organizations, they don't really have a workplace. They hire chapter executives or executive directors, whatever it is whatever's going to fit the best for your organization. They're going to hire them, and then sometimes they use their own home office as the address, or they have to pay for a PO box. They have to pay a service for that address. There's a lot of little things. Phones aren't free. You got to pay for that. One thing that always gets us are the credit card fees. A lot of times volunteers forget that credit cards can take so much out of the bottom line.
Yeah.
I worked for an organization once when they had this big event, a wonderful fundraising event. $5,000 were taken out from credit card fees. So they were just flabbergasted. And it's easy to see, when we use our credit card, we don't have to worry about the businesses that are, getting the 3% to 5% based on the credit card deducted from that transaction. We're not on that side of it. But as a nonprofit board, you are on that side of it. So you do have to take that. You also have to take out platforms. If you're in a membership organization, that websites aren't free. The more involved the website, the more expensive it is, registration, all things like that. Sometimes people come in forgetting, they're like, oh yeah, everything's free. It's a nonprofit. No. It's a tax status. That's it. All it means is that for the most part, you oftentimes get some kind of discount in the taxes of something that you're buying, but it ain't free.
Yeah, it's not free at all.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness. Okay. There's so much here. I know you have a couple of other things.
So for conflicting personalities is our next one. And it's another thing that people don't think about. You think your volunteer board, you're all working towards the same goal. And it's true. You are, or you should be. You should be reviewing that mission. You should be making sure that everyone's in alignment on that. That should be why you're volunteering on this board. But even if you have the same goal, everybody's going to want to do it a different way. And people are imperfect. That's just what it is. So conflicting personalities is definitely something that people don't think about.
Yeah.
When you're on a team at work, most likely you aren't going to get along with everyone at every single point in time. And this is the same. It's a team. Everybody wants it done a certain way. And it can go ahead and stomp out progress if you let it. So thankfully, I have had the pleasure of working with a lot of boards that have systems in place so that if there are conflicting personalities, if it starts to get too much, it's one thing if, sometimes a board meeting might get a little, not heated, but, you might feel it rising. Heated. Sometimes board meetings might get a little heated. Absolutely. Yes. And then I always say, that's kind of where volunteer roles come into play. So in my world, I always say you use me to manage problems, but the president should be managing the problem children. So they're the ones who really should be communicating with the rest of the board. That to me makes them, even if they shy away from confrontation, that's no problem, but they can't be the type to always put their head in the sand. They have to be willing to confront someone if they are being a problem child on that board. It really does. It can really alter the flow of the organization if there's even just a problem between two board members. And if you feel like you're that board member, just be yielding. Like it's, take a little exercise in that.
It's true. It's so true. And, because everyone said, there's always that person on a board that's, quote, considered the thorn in the side. And the reason why is because they ask a lot of questions. But here's what. a lot of times that if you think about it and change your perspective, like you were saying, that's actually can save some organizations from some troubles. While you don't necessarily think that asking all those questions is necessary all the time, the fact that that person, either for understanding or because they are they're like, hey, I'm just trying to keep us clean, and make sure that we have answers to these questions, that can be a good thing. So just take it as a part of the organization and working together, because the bottom line is the last thing you want is for personalities to interfere with the strategic plan, to interfere with the implementation of the mission of the organization. I've seen that happen as well, because it starts becoming a problem, a focus, like you said, the problem child thing, becoming a focus on the people rather than the mission. And that is a huge problem. And you cannot stick your head in the sand. You're absolutely right about that.
The last thing on that, because I know we just keep on talking, but we love it so much, is just, I feel like the other problem child, you're right, one has to do with the person who has questions. Another one often is the person who's not there for any of the board meetings and then comes in once every 6 months and then chimes in with all of these ideas. And then, won't show up again, or is so out of touch that they don't realize we already discussed this. If you were just at a board meeting 2 months ago, you would have realized why we squashed that idea to begin with. So, again, this goes back to some of the previous chapters, is making sure that you ask some questions, because it's always better when a board has a policy in place for dealing with some of those board members.
Yep. I'm literally drafting a code of conduct and ethics policy right now for one of my boards, and all of these things are reflected in it. Yep.
Nice. Well, the last thing to think about in terms of just, this overall expectation, like common challenges when it comes to, I can't think of the word. I lost it and I'm done. When it comes to these
like the tangible organizational stuff. Yeah.
Yes. And I was thinking tangible. That was the word for outdated resources. So a lot of times what happens is an organization purchased a resource years ago, and then they've started piecing out all of these things. It usually happens with technology because, they purchased a database, and then they purchased a separate credit card processing system, and then they purchased a separate event processing system. And they don't realize that nowadays there's something that does it all in one. It might be more expensive, but when you take into consideration what you're paying the chapter executive for versus what you're paying for that product, is it saving, even if it's more expensive, if it's saving some of their time that they could be using for other things, it might be worth it to you.
Yeah.
So really, I always suggest talking it out with the staff to see what they think are resources that can be updated. Usually, we're getting training for things. So I sit in on webinars every month. I go to leadership conferences, things like that, to make sure that I'm staying up to date with what's going on, so that if there are tools and resources available to bring our organization forward, then let's do it. You, as a volunteer, most likely aren't going to know that. So really talking it out, again, that open communication with the staff, as we discussed before, is so key in making sure that the organization is keeping up to date.
Yeah, for sure. And I know that one of the things that I always say is that, especially if you're a new board member, if you're a new volunteer to board service, and or if you're new to this particular board, one of the things that's hard is when you are tossed into making really important decisions and you don't feel like you know anything yet, right? That can definitely be a challenge, and it can put some people at a disadvantage. And so one of the things is, number one, acknowledge acknowledge it for what it is, And then also making sure this is a perfect time to make sure you do ask those questions. And if they're tough questions, they're just tough questions, because before you can make a decision on something that can impact the organization for months and years to come, you need to be able to feel comfortable with it. I have been on boards where there was something that was going on. It was tossed at us pretty quickly, and I abstained from the vote. And when I did that, people all of a sudden like, wait, what just happened? I'm like, I'm not comfortable voting on this because I don't have enough information. Right? That's not being contradictory. That's honoring your responsibility as a board member to make sure that you're making informed decisions and making sure there's enough information being shared, so that you can make, because a lot of times it comes up when you're about to spend a buttload of money on something. I have been there. I'm like, you want me to spend how much on that? You want me to approve how much on this contract? I need more info before I'm comfortable doing that. And so, whether it's a small organization or a big one, I've had that come up with a $5,000 line item. I've had it come up with a $50,000 line item. And I'm like, hold up. I need more info before I can do that. And if they decide to move forward, guess what? There are things that you as a board member get to do, which sometimes it's abstaining from that vote if you're not comfortable making that. But again, that's a reality that comes up sometimes, and that you shouldn't feel pressured into making decisions that are going to impact the organization in a big way. If you're not comfortable, it's tough, but it's that's big people stuff sometimes that has to be done.
It's true. It's tough, but that's part of the open communication, and that's part of what being on volunteer board is supposed to be. You're supposed to be leading in whatever mission, vision that you have as a team. And so if someone on that team is struggling to really understand, in theory, no one else should really have any problems making sure that everyone's on board with that. It is another sign of a healthy board.
Yeah, especially when the more experienced people help, help mentor those folks, because sometimes they're relying on the more experienced board members and making decisions because they're like, okay, I respect and honor this person. So that's something that goes both ways. Now, one of those other things that comes up is when they're just plain growing pains, with an organization, when an organization is going from one level to the next, and they're literally in their programming, in their spending, whatever. And there's always resistance. There's always going to be someone who's just like, I don't know if we should be doing this, right? And having a difficult time pivoting, especially this comes up a lot on boards or in organizations where the board has been around a long time. You get some new people on, you get some fresh blood, you got an ED, you got to shift, and you're needing to shift in order to go to that next level. And you have resistance and people who are like, I don't know that we should be doing this. Again, not saying that it shouldn't, but it can be a challenge in the decision-making process. And just recognize it for what it is, as a growing pain, and something that you have to work through as a leadership board that's in charge of governing that organization. It's a reality. It just happens. Those things happen. Every organization goes through it at some point or time. It normally ends up with a shift in leadership, in the executive director space or the board chair space even, right? The ED could be on board, but let's say I've been on a board where that happened too. I told you, I've been on all kinds of boards, right? But where the board chair wasn't there yet, and you had the rest of the board that was ready. So sometimes it requires a shift in leadership at that level. But in any case, growing pains are a part of the process. Having resistance to change is a part of the process. And it's going to require some growth on everyone's part to be able to make it through that, again, so that you can stay aligned and focus on the mission of the organization.
The great thing about that too is, knowing that it's part of the process is part of the issue. So realizing that is great. And there are resources available at any budget. So if you're not sure, let's say you're volunteering for a membership organization, but you don't know what your members want, you can survey them. You're not going to get an answer from everyone, no, but if you get an answer from a quarter of your membership, you should have a very good idea of what it is that they need. If you have more money than that, then there's consulting firms, there's all of these things that you can use in order to see how to best manage those growing pains.
Yes. Yes, for sure. For sure. Which gets us to the last item on the list. Oh my God. This is the one that like we would need a whole other show episode for. Oh my gosh. But that's nonprofit crises and the denial factor is how I labeled it. And it's that fact of when an organization is in trouble financially, from a leadership perspective, all kinds of things, one or the other or both. A lot of times it ends up being both. And the leadership, the governing board is in denial about what's going on. That is so dangerous. It's so dangerous. It's not good for the organization. It's not good for the programmings that you're offering or the, clients, whether those clients are people that you serve, whether they're members. It's not a good space to be in. And it's hard. It's difficult. Crises do come up. But being in denial about it does not help anyone at all and actually puts the entire organization at risk ultimately. I've seen organizations come to the brink of being destroyed because of denial factors of somebody, especially of great influence, being in denial about what's going on. And or actually like they break, the organization breaks and it can't survive it. So these are not things you go looking for. These are not things you want to have to deal with, but you do need to be aware of it because it's one of those things where people really will stick their head in the sand. And sometimes somebody's got to be the real champion and stand up and say, we've got to deal with this or this organization is going to go away. And most of the time, no one wants that to happen. But if you get to that point, sometimes it does. And you've still got a fiduciary responsibility to stand up and make sure that the organization, the crisis is addressed properly. And or if the organization needs to be dissolved, it still requires responsibility on the part of the board to find the right resources to make sure that that's done in an appropriate manner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like that. It's not, again, people don't realize, a nonprofit is its own business model. So just like you couldn't just be like, okay, well, we're done with your business. You have to take care of things. The same would be said with a nonprofit organization. Yeah. There are definitely things that need to get paid, things that need references. There's what are you going to do with all this history, all these archives? Is there a larger organization involved, or are there chapters involved, smaller chapters? All of these things are things that need to be taken into consideration. Yes.
So again, going back to making sure you ask all the right kinds of questions, as many as you can, right? And learning and it's there's process. It can be wonderful expectations, wonderful things to go on, which we will talk about next time because we do not want to end on a negative note, but we also know that we would be out of line not to address the challenges that do come up. And we really just touched on the tip of the iceberg when it comes to those things. But we would love to hear from you. If there's some more things that you'd like to, hear about, have questions on, DM either one of us. Our contact information is going to be in the caption on this. And we're both on all the socials. Our socials are going to be on there. I know we're both on LinkedIn and Instagram. And so that you can check in on that. Our last episode of this special series is scheduled for May 30th at 10:30. And we are going to be talking about why we engage a nonprofit board service and all the lovely reasons for that. And capping off this series that's been so much fun to do. I'm so excited.
It has been.
hear some more from you, because we might be able to be convinced to do some more of this. Who knows? What do you say, Danielle?
I mean, if you guys want all of the hot tea versus just an overview.
So funny. Well, it has been a pleasure being here with you all today. Again, go back, check out the other episodes, and we will catch you next time. So take care, everyone. Talk to you next time.